think what's really interesting about permaculture right now, I feel like permaculture is starting to have a moment where it has potential to mainstream. I think we're not there yet. But like, I've been working for this company that does food forest design for the last, for a little over 2 years. And they've specifically had a goal of like, how can we get food forests to be in as many backyards as possible? So, and given the challenges that we've been facing as a society, right, this seems like a really interesting thing to do. It feels like a really effective thing to do. Like when I think about the problems of our food distribution system and climate, right? So our food distribution system in the States, we have a 1,500 food mile system where on average, our food comes from 1,500 miles away. And if I draw a circle 1,500 miles around St. Louis, which is the population center of the country, right? Envision half of the food coming from within that circle, right? From within that part of the states. And then outside of that circle is another 50%, which is the West Coast states and everywhere else in the world. And if you look at actually the statistics of where our food comes from, that's actually not that far off from reality, right? Like 20% of our food is imported. And we all know that California and Oregon are the two most agriculturally diverse states in the country. And, California probably accounts for another 16th of that produce, right? Or 16%, not 16th. But so between California and abroad, that's a third of our food. And that's sort of a bonkers number to think about, right?
Yeah.
So given the struggle of, people, what people are having to do in their livelihoods right now, people who have access to some sort of soil can actually get a decent return on growing their own food compared with working a second job, for example. Right. This is definitely, people can view it as sort of a supplemental income. And that's what I think the opportunity is right now, right? It's sort of like,
that's a cool way to look at it.
This is a good for the planet thing. And it's good for people, not only economically, but I think in terms of like nervous system health, right? Getting our hands in the soil.
It's so therapeutic to work in a garden.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, the way I view that is, we should not be watching television, which is amping up our nervous system.
Exactly.
We should be getting into community gardens, which is like more what our nervous systems were designed to do.
Yeah. So this concept of making a backyard edible forest, food forest, making it a mainstream thing that people just know about. It's being talked about.
Right.
So
right.
You see that headed in that direction, like
potentially.
Yeah.
It's such a leap of thinking from our dominant paradigm culture, right? Which is why I still think it's like I can envision that transition, right? It's a matter of like, are we enrolling much of society into actually making that happen? Which is still a question that is out there, right? We still have, we're living amongst the transition to AI, right? And whatever that means for our society as a technologically driven society. Does it mean that we open up our labor for more enjoyable pursuits like serving tea and working in the garden? I hope so, right?
How did you get involved in permaculture design?
So I did my permaculture certification back in 2010. I had graduated college in 2008. And before that, in 2006, I had gone woofing, right? So I traveled across the country and went and worked on a couple of farms up in New England.
So for people that don't know what woofing is, how would you explain that?
Woofing is, well, it's an organization called WOOF that is willing workers on organic farms, right? So it's basically a program by which folks can volunteer domestically or internationally on organic farms to, skill up and learn and have the experience of having done that. So I was very involved with sustainability activism in college at the time, and actually basically took a summer and fall off. And yeah, it did some bicycle touring and then worked on some farms. And having studied both ecology and design, permaculture was sold to me as like, well, it's this ecological design system. And so that was naturally very interesting to me. And so, yeah, me and my partner at the time took a permaculture certification course together down in Berkeley. And the course had all of these, basically, it's this realm of part of permaculture, which means permanent agriculture, is agriculture, right? But it also goes into like philosophy of how to live with the land and how to live with the earth, right? Because ultimately permaculture is sort of this portmanteau of indigenous agriculture theory, which European diaspora in America has no context for our own indigenous European agricultural practices. Right. So it's essentially a design science that has borrowed from indigenous wisdom from all over the world about what does it look like when we interact with a certain landscape, whether it's a dry landscape or a hot, humid landscape or a cold landscape, right? These all have different strategies that people who are living with their land for a multi-generation time frame would probably naturally seek out and use in order to increase the yield of that land, right? So, for example, like on this continent, like the natives on the plains who had access to the forest edges would set fires at the forest edges to increase the amount of edge between the meadows and the plains and the forest. More edge means more browse plants for deer and other game, which means more food. Not only for deer, but for those of us who eat deer, right? So managing the land with the strategy of like, what's the greatest yield for everybody? Yeah, all of the beings that have to inhabit the land. That's the big shift that permaculture, I think, offers from our industrial agriculture system, which is very reductive, which is extracting value from the soil, which is a mechanistic mindset that only can exist based on inputs of cheap oil or cheap labor, right? So cheap energy is whether it's human energy or fossil energy, that's what enables our current agriculture system, whereby 1% of our modern economy can work in agriculture, whereas in traditional societies, most people work in agriculture, right?
Yeah, it's a really interesting situation that we're in with all of it. And you mentioned that you were just at a permaculture conference recently.
So I did a workshop called Permaculture and the Big Picture at this little festival up in the gorge.
Nice.
Which is a really lovely little festival. It's like maybe like 200 people.
I'm curious what kinds of creative solutions people have had that you were exposed to, or that you're excited about from that.
Yeah. Well, there were folks talking about like, carbon sequestration in the forests. Actually giving a workshop, I didn't get to go to that many of the other workshops. Right. My time was sort of like, I spent my morning preparing.
What was the workshop that you gave?
Permaculture and the Big Picture.
Okay.
Right. So a lot of what we're talking about now, right, is just sort of like Yeah, I feel like teaching someone to plant plants, like this is the easy part, but shifting the mindset about what permaculture is and what the relationship between me and the world should be, that's to me is the bigger work, right? Because I mean, I can sell you a permaculture design and plant the trees for you, and if you don't have the theory to apply to it, there's not actually, I don't know that I've done any favors, right?
Yeah. So what sorts of ways are you finding it effective to teach people about that overarching what permaculture is that they can integrate?
A couple of the concepts I've been thinking through, well, let me say that I think permaculture has this ethic of restoring the land, right? So it's earth care, people care, fair share. Those are the three permaculture ethics, right? And there are people using the philosophy to regreen the deserts, right? Like there's Jeff Lawton in Jordan, right? Greening the Desert Project, which has really incredible systems based on low water, high heat climate and how to make as much abundance and resilience in that climate as possible, right? This to me is like, it's like reversing our creation story, right? In the like biblical traditions, right? The Adam and Eve story it's an ecological and psychological historical moment for me, which is like the creation of the deserts, right? We go from a society that lives within its bounds to a society that has picked one too many apples and suddenly the forest doesn't regenerate, right? And when we look at what's going on in the ecological history at that point, we're seeing that in the Middle East at the time when we think that story happened, the climate changed and became drier, right? And the moisture and the livable agriculture climate envelope, we could call it, moved from lower elevations to higher elevations because it was a warm spell that created, in addition to a population pressure probably, that created the deserts, right? And so permaculture claims to give you the tools to restore land and make it more abundant than it was before. Right. And so, a thought experiment I've been going through, right, is sort of like imagining what that that first mile problem is when it's solved, right? So living in a food forest, right? And there are places on the planet that are essentially massive food forests, like the Amazon and the Congo are managed as food forests, not necessarily in a way that Westerners understand because we've lost our permaculture knowledge. But, we look at indigenous landscapes, they're managed as food forests, right? And so imagining what it is to live in a food forest, right? Imagining everything I use on a daily basis is readily available and planted.
What an interesting paradigm to live in and experience.
Right.
That you could just walk out your door and everything you need is right there.
Which is the opposite of the 1500 mile paradigm that we currently live in.
Everything you need is at a store.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's actually taken us thousands of years and multiple ruptures to get to this point, right? Because I imagine, okay, the food forest we're at 100% capacity for this food forest. Suddenly, I have to send somebody as a runner. There's a day trip that's necessary to get something, right? And maybe that day trip is by foot, right? As scarcity gets deeper, maybe that's a horse trip. then it's a multi-day horse trip, right? Then we have to think about, okay, are we packing enough food for the horses, or is there a village that we can re-equip ourselves at? So, for thousands of years, we're developing sort of these networks of trying to pull in enough resources. That really gets faster in the last 200 years, right? Because we're having our population explosion. We're developing things like trains, which totally change the game, right? Like you can see there's historical maps of travel times across the states, right? And in the 1700s, the map is incomplete, and in the 1800s, early 1800s, it's 3 months walk across, or whatever it was, and then the rail comes and it's 7 days travel, which was 3 months walk 10 years before. So, rail, and then cars, which totally distribute, they totally atomized our city structure. And then we have the internet, which also totally atomizes our society, makes us a non-located society. And the speed with which society goes because of those developments is, again, to get back to like one of the reasons permaculture I think is important, and growing our own food and having a relationship with the land is important, is for the nervous system, right? Because our nervous systems were not built to do this whole digital world thing, right? It's actually incredibly challenging for us, and we need some sort of respite and reset away from that. Or some sort of balance, right? I don't think it's going away necessarily, but some sort of balance.
Yeah, what are some of the things that you find are balancing for that issue? Some more time in nature in general, or earthing, or
yeah, I mean, more time in nature, right?
Yeah.
And personally, it's a struggle, right? Because I've worked in the tech industry, and I've worked driving a car, right? And I'm as deep into the digital world as anyone, right? Like I've been designing for clients across the country, which means digital design. So, it's definitely like, yeah, getting in nature, right? And the closest nature to you is your backyard. And the most intimate way you can engage with that backyard is by growing plants. And growing plants that you'd like to eat is probably the best use of your energy and time, rather than growing ornamentals, which has been, sort of our habit in the States. Our idea of the lawn comes from the 18th century British aristocracy, and is basically a demonstration that you're rich enough to not have to grow your own food.
And now this is used for croquet games.
Right. Or this is just a beautiful pasture, or right. And
Do you think there's some place for the lawn still?
Yeah, I think that parks to play in, and parks to play in, festival grounds, like totally appropriate to have some lawns, right? But do we all need our personal lawn?
Personal lawn, yeah.
No, like we spend $100 million a year on lawns, right? Which is on the level of military salaries for the States, right? It's actually sort of bonkers, the amount of energy we put into making ornamental plants happen. So,
yeah, a little more balance toward functional edible plants.
Mm-hmm.
What are some things that you personally like to grow, food-wise?
I like to grow. Well, so like the last 4 years, I was living on my friend's farm for 3 years during the groundhog years pandemic. And I mean, my buddy was doing his idea was full diet farming, right? So we were growing, and I was helping out with his growing plan of, just basically growing everything you might want, right? And we were like, one of my experiments was, we were looking at like, okay, we have all this garlic on hand, we have all this arugula that the bug sort of got, but it's still edible. And we're like, what can we do with this? And I'm like, pesto. right? So we made a massive batch of pesto. Right. So I'm thinking about like, in terms of like, not necessarily what's my favorite to grow, but what's my favorite thing to eat? What's the best value that I can get out of growing my own food, right? Arugula and garlic seems very natural, right? We're in a Mediterranean climate here. Like, great. Yeah, let's grow some pesto, right? Oregon is really great for berries, like blueberries, right? Which are an expensive thing in stores, right? But I mean, they're a superfood. They're super antioxidant. They're delicious. Yeah, blueberries. So
love them. Yep. Grapes as well.
Grapes as well.
Grapes are great. Having those around. What about kale? Do you work much with that?
Yeah, kale is a standard.
Yeah. It's kind of a given.
I feel like, kale is one of my go-to vegetables. I just like chop it up and fry it or saute it, or I just eat it raw as a salad, right?
Nice.
So super easy, perennial.
I wanted to hear a little bit about your experience with living in a bus and that journey and what you gained from that experience. So the 40-foot school bus, was it?
Yeah. So I bought this 40-foot school bus while I was working a remote friendly job in 2019 and helping my buddy build his house out here in Oregon. And we were taking a break from roofing one day, and he's like, my neighbors from the coast are selling a school bus. That might be up your alley. I was like, all right, yeah. remembering the times I spent traveling with a bus like a decade before, right? I'm like, okay, let's give it a shot. Like, I'll go visit the bus and see what happens, right? And it's on fire sale, essentially, because these folks are moving to Maine. And I'm like, okay, like this is half a year's rent where I'm from. Let's try it. So I bought that and was up here, and then 2020 came. And suddenly it was like, well, I can share a house with 6 people in one bathroom, or I can go live on a farm with a school bus. And I was like, that's a no-brainer. So, I mean, I would say it was definitely, there's something romantic about being very close with the land and living sort of, I would say, with nature's cycles, right? Like there's windows all around. It's a little bit like camping. There's a wood stove, so it's a little bit like having a house. You can see the sunrise over the cattle fields.
Beautiful.
Totally beautiful, right? Yeah. Then the flip side of that is our ancestors didn't use wood stoves alone, right? And so the rhythm of waking up in the middle of the night to stoke my stove was dysregulating, right? So I ended up, it ended up being 3-season house, and then I would travel for the winters, right? Which was generally fine, right? And I would say, yes, the shoulder seasons are glorious. The summer, happy to have a house support when on a really hot day. But just like, being in the body and noticing what the limits are, right? Like the body is actually very adaptable between like 40 and 90 degrees, right? Maybe 95 is when it really starts to get hot, right? And 40 is definitely not sweater weather, right? That's, you build yourself a fire, right? So it was a fascinating experiment. And I mean, I'm super glad I did it. It gave me a lot of space to do, essentially like, agricultural work, which is not supported, right? And really sort of learn as much as I could, working on an apple farm, working on my buddy's farm, and doing design for people, right? Just sort of like, it was a very holistic place for me we call it a sit spot, right? In permaculture. It's like, where do you look at the world from?
Oh, a sit spot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was also, it's just fascinating because you have to, I mean, one thing permaculture deals with as well is like building resilience into all of these systems that we've built for ourselves, right? So like, and when you build a self-contained house, you have to recreate all of those systems, right? So you have to think about like, okay, what is water? What does water do? What is my laundry system, right? What is my waste removal system, right? You have to think about all of those things again, which is, I think super useful for us in this very built up industrial growth society where infrastructure is very expensive, right? There's a book called Strong Towns, and he says there's a number for cities that work. What you want is like $1 of public investment, tax money, to be spent, and then $20 of private capital to be generated by that $1 of investment. In our system, there are places in the States where you put in $1 of public investment and you lose money and you get 50 cents out. And that and that is bonkers, right? And that's how expensive our current infrastructure is.
That's very eye-opening.
It was shocking when I saw the distance between those two figures, but it maps with my experience also, right? Like, so for example, in Bali, where the villages are organized by watershed, right? Your group of villages is essentially a watershed council because that's the most important political unit, is who shares your water, right? And I remember walking on the sidewalk and noticing that underneath the sidewalk is the sewer or the drain. And if the drain got clogged, the locals would simply take a pry bar, pry up the sidewalk, and burn whatever was blocking the drain. Super simple. In the States, this is 100 times more expensive. This takes a backhoe and a team of guys and like safety equipment, and that's, it literally is 100 times more expensive to do essentially the same thing. Right? Maybe there's a slightly more sanitary way of doing it than in an open sewer that is buried beneath the sidewalk. But the 100%, the 100x cost difference is really staggering, right? So if you just envision like system after system after system in modern industrial society is more expensive than it needs to be to function. And that's going to produce some collapses somewhere, for which the systems that permaculture suggests that are really simple development solutions, right? Like composting toilets, are going to be super, super, super essential if we ever realize that we can't actually afford these complicated systems that we've created.
What are some of the aspects of permaculture related to how people live together in villages and structures like that? Culture.
That's a good question. Right, because permaculture is, you don't have a permanent agriculture as on your lonesome. Right, it requires living in community. And transitioning there requires some sort of community, right? So on my buddy's land, right, like we're dealing with the land ownership system, which, in our society is a 30-year mortgage, which you generally, it's made very complicated to share such a mortgage, right? Which was why the school bus was an excellent, low risk investment opportunity, but also it's stacking functions. Like you can't build the farm on your own. You need help, right? And so, that's why woofer housing is the targeted goal for the school bus, right? Because I feel like I've gotten the value out of it. I'm living in town again. And people need to be able to weave in and out of urban and rural communities in order to make permaculture and to make sustainable living happen, right? So, and we call this invisible structures in permaculture, whether it's like, everything from, what does land tenure and governance look like to what does community agreements look like? What does community mediation look like? What is healthy communication, right? That's all, holistically ties into, how do we make permanent culture? How do we make something that can last more than an investment cycle happen?
Yeah. So the name permaculture comes from permanent culture, right?
Permanent agriculture.
Permanent agriculture, but it could
but
also
it expands to the cultural realms as well, because
that's interesting.
Because culture comes out of agriculture, right?
Right.
Like, we think about what is a local diet look like, right? And the culture is it's comes around the production of that diet, right? Festivals. So Carnival, right? Which it has been taken on by the Catholic Church as the beginning of Lent, which is the fasting time, right? So Carnival literally means meat festival. It's the last of the meat. It's starting to thaw. We can no longer freeze the meat. We got to use that up.
Oh, okay. That's where it comes from.
Right? Like, yeah, like, what is it? Yeah. So, Harvest Festival, right? In the fall. Fertility festivals in the spring, right? Because traditional cultures timed.
It's working with the cycles of nature.
And worked with the cycles of nature, right?
Okay. So
yeah.
festivals that are built around that. Do you feel like there's enough festivals doing that right now? Or is it more of just an overlay of we just want to have a party whenever?
I mean, in the sort of transformational festival scene, right? It's sort of, there's an aspect of like, we just want to have a party whenever, right?
Which I think it's like we need to have parties and celebrate life.
We do need to celebrate life.
But can we tie it in so it's seasonally relevant, and then it makes it maybe more potent and more relevant?
Right. Yeah. And there are some like, if you really look at, I feel like if you really look at the way our society is organized, there's still seasonality, right? Like even something as banal as doing your taxes, right? The reason it's on April 15th is because you spent the winter counting the numbers and you don't have time for that in the summer, right? So and then you go vote for people in November because that's when they dive in to do the big numbers, right? It's like, that's not important before then. They're farming or they're guiding farms or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, so, seasonality is super important, right? And living with the seasons, right? If we had a society that was truly living with the seasons, right, we'd probably all have September off to go harvest, right? That would just be the important work that needed done. And no one would be doing paperwork at those times. So yeah, those are, to me, sort of the communal structures that would build an ecological society.
Totally. There's something you said about a decade before you got your school bus. You were on another school bus journey.
Oh, yeah.
I was curious to hear a little bit more about that.
Right. So that was right after college. And I graduated in 2008, which was a great year to graduate. Economically, not. So I had moved back up to the Bay, and I had this idea that I wanted to have, this sort of reliving the 60s hippie experience of San Francisco, right? I had been listening to Alan Watts and reading Be Here Now, and, found a Sufi gathering, when I was in college, and was like listening to old 60s rock and roll, right? And wanted to do a bit of the artist's life in San Francisco. So I moved into a circus warehouse in East Oakland.
It's a good way to start it.
Yeah. Which, it was a no-brainer, right? It was like $600 white wall, $600 white wall, $400 circus warehouse. And I called them up and they're like, yeah, we have a hot tub in the living room and we're going to have communal meals and it's going to be a love fest. I'm like, great, sign me up, right? So
sounds perfect.
So suddenly I'm living with all these mid-college kids who went to Camp Win a Rainbow together, which is Wavy Gravy's circus camp.
Yeah.
And a couple months in, one of my housemates is out on Haight Street and he goes into a cafe and he's sitting down with a friend at the cafe, and these two other folks come up to them and they slap their hands on the table and they're like, come with us. We're going to go see Amma and drop acid.
Amma the hugging saint?
Amma the hugging saint.
Oh, right.
Right. And so they're all in their rainbow day glow outfits.
Okay.
And of course the answer is yes. So
taking the ride.
Yeah. So this guy, Jonah, has an old Chicago city bus that he's gotten off eBay or somewhere. I don't remember.
What color is it?
It's it's black and we're in the process of painting it.
Okay. So it's in process.
All over.
Okay.
And he moves his bus out in front of our warehouse and we have a series of acid test reenactments, essentially.
Okay.
Right. So suddenly, oh yeah, I'm in the art scene, aren't I?
Right in the middle of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So
the bus is being painted. Live music.
Okay. People are being painted. Hot tub in the living room.
How many people fit in the hot tub in the living room?
Oh, it's a normal hot tub, like, 8. But, party of like 100 people or something, right? And then, so we do this like weekly from, for November and December. And then Jonah's like, yeah, we're going to go to the desert for New Year's.
Just out of nowhere.
And we're like, okay, great. So a bunch of us hop on the bus to the desert. Meanwhile, back at the warehouse, the alcohol kids have their own New Year's party. And apparently there are some fireworks that went off and disaster happened.
Oh no.
So
that's always the alcohol and the fireworks.
It's bad always the alcohol and the fireworks, right? Like the
bad combination.
The psychedelic kids just want to have a good time and not destroy anything.
Yeah.
So yeah, but we were out in the desert.
So there were alcohol kids and psychedelic kids in the same warehouse?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Or I would say it was an alcohol party.
Okay.
Right. And that was the one that got us kicked out of the warehouse. But
the fireworks, that'll get you every time.
Yeah.
I got kicked out of a party house that I was living in way back in the day, and it was because of fireworks. The neighbors, cracked down, and
right,
that'll do it.
Yeah, but that scene went on a couple of years, bouncing between, people living out of a school, the bus in San Francisco, and renting different apartments. Right. We had this one apartment. It was overlooking the bay. They had a room called the bedroom, which was just full of IKEA beds, wall to wall.
The bedroom, okay.
Right? Whoever needed to crash could crash.
Plenty of beds.
And we had it was a very fancy apartment, and I was shocked that we were able to rent such a fancy and furnished apartment, and we were, and
sounds fun.
Yeah, we had these beautiful dinner parties, and sang songs around the table, and had just musical performances, and
everyone got along pretty well.
Generally, right.
What do you find it is with people living in close quarters? Like, what are the usual challenges, and how do you think they could be avoided?
Ego challenges and boundaries, right? We're not used to living in communal settings like that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're all very accustomed to being incredibly boundaried, right? More so than I think people are in most other countries, right? We're very sort of like, we generally demand a lot of personal space, right? So the challenges of community are really that, that personal space gets questioned. And this is true. I mean, this is true for that scene of folks. This is true for, places, intentional communities, right? Like Llama Foundation is a place I've spent a little bit of time, right? And they have a joke that they call the residents llama beans because the beans are in the cooker.
The pressure cooker together.
Yeah. So, anytime you live with a chosen family of like half a dozen people or more, there's a little bit of a pressure cooker, and there's bound to be, it's like
the dynamics exponentially get more complicated.
It's way more complication, right? It's like,
adds.
it's the difference between monogamy and polyamory. And you just made it more complicated, right? By dating two people. And if you're each dating two people, there's 6 connections that gotta be made here, right? And negotiated, right? And they each have their own sort of boundaries, right? And so community is very complicated, right? Like that. But it's great.
The benefits, right?
There's a lot of benefits to like going through your shit like that, right? And I would say, I mean, with that particular community, I was more on the edge, right? I wasn't part of the central locus of what was going on, but there's definitely, you could see there were definitely certain challenges, right? After that time, I lived in a house with 12 people in San Francisco, right? And that was sort of just bonkers. That was after I got back from Asia. And there were, the kids and the guys in the front were from this trim scene, and they were doing a lot of drugs. And we in the back of the house, the 2 bedrooms, were like, what the hell is going on up front?
What would you hear? Like just crazy things?
Well, it was just like they had crazy whippets parties, and they were that was not the boundaries any of us had agreed to. These were just, their girls moved out and they moved their trim scene boyfriends in, and that was the scene. And we were like,
that's what they like to do.
That's shocking. We want to sit here and go get, we're going to sit. It was sort of shanty it was party in the front, shanty in the back. It was the mullet house. And we were just like,
we want to meditate.
We want to go to the wholesale market and get avocados and peppers and make guacamole and eat fruitarian guacamole and just get high on that. Like, we don't know what you were doing, but and there was sort of a détente in the house for a while, right? Because we had enough people who wanted the shanty that it counterbalanced the rest of it. But yeah, like living in community, right? Like everyone has their own idea of what they want the community to be, and it's slightly different. That's a terrible example because it's extreme, right?
It's funny though.
It's hilarious, right? And I look back at it and I'm like, wow, I survived that. So
what would be your ideal living situation, or are you already in it right now? Like, do you have kind of an idea of like, this is how you'd like to be living with community? Or
I mean, in terms of, I don't know that I have an ideal, right? Because it takes a long time to build an ideal intentional community. And I'm not entirely convinced that that's the best use of our time right now. Right. I mean, I live in community with one other person in a house she and her mom own right now. And we're going to get a second housemate at some point. Right. So, and I think that the economic reality is that we can't get away from communal living. Right. I believe that we have housing for twice as many people in the States as we currently think we do, just by being creative and living together, right? And so navigating those social dynamics of like, okay, what are the boundaries that I'm willing to live with, right? And can I expand those and still feel comfortable in my home, right? I think that's something that we all should be grappling with. And I'm not necessarily like intentional community is really beautiful. And I've seen some models that work really well. Things that I would integrate into living with a larger community definitely are like, I would say Llama Foundation has what they call heart club, right? So definitely like emotional check-in, right? And a model for being, intentional about making sure that like feelings are open, right? Because if feelings are closed in community, then that's when you start getting judgment and crosstalk and
everyone
drama.
can feel it. You're walking on eggshells,
Right.
that sort of thing.
And that's absolutely what you want to avoid, right? So
it's no way to live.
Yeah, there's no way to live. Or you have the politics of the party in the front, shanty in the back, right? Like shared intention, super important. Very difficult to actually come by, right? Like let's not have an illusion about that, right? Because often you need somebody right now for that room. Right. So
yeah,
but I think like I would like to see like I'd like to live in like networks of houses, right, that collaborate, right? I think that the best ways we can build community, right, rather than saying we're gonna make a co-op of 12 people and like we're gonna practice democracy in our house, right? Sometimes that goes off on a big tangent.
It's very much an experiment. You have to be ready for an experimental outcome.
Right, it's an experimental outcome. Whereas, having a group of houses together that like do potlucks, or maybe like does a big cook once a week, right? And they trade.
I'm a big fan of the idea of everyone having their own roof over their head, even if it's a cabin, a tiny home, whatever structure it is, a yurt, a small house, cottage. Everyone has their own roof over their head and their own kitchen, but then there's these central gathering areas and central kitchens that people are using too. So you have the village life, and you're running into people and seeing people every day and interacting around food, but then everyone's got their own roof over their heads.
Yeah.
So then you have that sovereignty still.
Right. Yeah. That's which is the brilliance of co-housing, right?
Co-housing. Yeah. That would be
model.
That model. Right.
Or, there could be like community kitchens, right? I mean, somebody could build a community kitchen.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So much of it seems that it's about geographic placement though, because a lot of times we're living in these communities that are spread out and you can't just walk over.
Right.
And so, it has to be it seems like people, if they could figure out how to get parcels of land that are right next to each other and then collaborate and work that way, it seems like that could be a good way if they have the resources for that, which is another challenge.
Yeah. Land tenure, I would say, is one of the biggest challenges to actually having permaculture, right? Because if we are on a 20-year mortgage, we're not thinking about 200-year processes, right? Whereas go back to the example of Bali, right? Like 99-year leases on houses in a village watershed.
Wow.
Right. So the long-term thinking is built in.
Wow.
Right. Whereas our, they would call this a freehold market model, way shorter term. Right. Actually, yeah, it affects our mindset, right? Like when I was in Thailand, I was on this permaculture, I would say like a permaculture homestay, right? It was a bunch of like travelers coming through to stay, and we had bamboo huts, and we were building more bamboo huts and farming, and sort of, again, with the like how cheap life can be, right? This was 10 years ago, and it was $4 a night to have my own bamboo hut and most of the food that I wanted to cook with. And this was sustainable for the farmer because, again, like almost everything he grew came from the property, right? Everything that was available came from the property. We bought rice from town sometimes because he wasn't a rice farmer and everyone around him was a rice farmer. Where was I going with that?
Just how things are in Thailand.
Edit. Oh, so we were building bamboo hut, and in class with him one day, I'm noticing in my hut there is bamboo electrical conduit, and I'm hearing the story that once his kitchen burned down, and so I ask, you don't worry about the house burning down from the bamboo electric conduit? And he's like, no, Western man build a house, lasts 150 years. The children don't learn to build houses. I build a house burns down, I teach my children to build houses. Mind blown. I'm like, right, okay, got it. Thank you.
Wow. How much time did you spend in Thailand?
I was there for like 2 months.
So enough to get a deep sense of the place, at least on some level.
I would say so, yeah. I was in Thailand for 2 months, Taiwan for 2 weeks, and Indonesia for a month. That trip, that was in 2013. And yeah, I mean, it opened my mind to like, what was possible with different land use.
Ah, very cool.
And tenure arrangements.
Uh-huh.
Definitely, right. Because we were in Thailand, that eco-village was up in the mountains near Burma. And you cross this sort of de facto border within the country where they're like passport checking for Burmese refugees. And then, so between that area, like up on the ridge above Chiang Mai and Burma, is sort of this no man's land. Or like, it almost felt like the Thai government didn't really have any power there, right? Because, for example, drugs are punishable by death, but everybody is trying to sell you opium and weed. And you go, that's fascinating, right? Or, the forest is technically owned by the king, and all of the landholders are practicing like slash and burn agriculture. Like it's fire season when I'm there, and they are burning the forest, right? And they're doing it well, right? They're doing it generally very responsibly. There's a little bit of a wildfire on the mountain. We didn't worry about that. But yeah, the longevity of the land tenure was really apparent.
Yeah, that would provide a really helpful perspective and then come back here and the contrast between the way things are being managed there versus here.
Right.
Seeing what the potentials are. Yeah. Going in a little bit of a different direction, I wanted to ask you about ecstatic dance and your journey with that and how you got into it.
I found ecstatic dance around the same time when I moved to Oakland.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was like, in 2009, 2010, it was just sort of like, I had found spiritual dance, right? And when I was in college, we went to these gatherings called Moon Tribe, which were sort of like desert dance parties, right? And ecstatic dance just felt like somewhere that I could like naturally sort of dive in, right? And just explore and be with my body and spirit, right? And
yeah. What are some of the ways that you approach it? Like when you go into an ecstatic dance, what are you wanting to get out of it?
I would say I definitely am a sort of a solo dancer, right? And so I'm seeking to like, just sort of like be with my body in my experience, right? And sort of see if I can move my body in ways that matches the music.
Yeah, I found that to be really enjoyable when you can just really be in that groove of feeling like the music is expressing itself through your body.
Yeah.
You're just very surrendered to it,
Yeah.
flowing with it.
Yeah. So yeah, generally I just like, I try to see how crazy my movements can get, right? And really like, especially if there's like some fun like staccato beats within, those are fun to like, sort of click
Totally.
your limbs to. And then I also experiment with like, going quarter time, right? Going very slowly with a fast song, right? And like seeing what movements I can create out of that.
Nice. So you said you don't do much partner dance. Do you ever get people asking you to dance, and then do you turn them down, or do you dance with them?
I would dance with someone if they offered, right? But I'm generally not seeking it out.
Do you find like just the energy of people can kind of read that you're in your own internal dance? So
that feels to be the case. Yeah.
It's an interesting. Learn so much about dynamics, nonverbal, human to human interaction dynamics through being on the dance floor,
right?
And the whole consent about dances, and what direction the dance is going to go, and then moment to moment. I don't know if you've ever done the contact improv.
I love contact improv.
Okay,
yeah, that's great.
So with that, I've been learning a lot through that, and going into the amoeba. I don't know if you've done that.
Yeah.
Okay, so the amoeba dance has been incredible for me. Like, just I've learned so much through that experience. And for anyone listening that doesn't know what the amoeba dance is, how would you describe that?
Well, it's like a contact improv with like 6 people, right?
It's like a bigger contact improv instead of just one person. Everyone's just kind of just like feeling the weight of each other, rolling off each other. Hands are connecting, arms, limbs. Yeah, it's just very flowy, and it's a very interesting experience, and also like a surrender.
Yeah.
You're surrendering to it's kind of like.
I had a great amoeba dance at Cantando la Vida a couple of years ago, which is this singing festival in Costa Rica.
Okay.
That I taught a song circle at, and towards the end of it, there were just like 4 or 5 of us standing around, and I was like, "Do you guys contact improv?" And we're like, "Yeah." We all lean into each other.
We started up right there.
Yeah,
that's great. It's so fun.
It's super fun.
Yeah, I was so intimidated by it until recently, so I've just been really getting into it.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I always like to talk with people about on the podcast here is the power of music and the unity experience that creates in a group of people that are experiencing the same music or songs at the same time. What are your thoughts on that as related to song circles and this permaculture movement?
Mm-hmm. Well, so I mean, song circles are this sort of departure from how we usually experience music in Western culture, which is as a consumer, right? Song circles are very participatory and embodied, right? So, this is how we create village culture. Is it's sort of like we take responsibility for growing our own food, and we take responsibility for singing and writing our own songs, right? And this, gets us, I think, a little bit out of our ego, right? And out of separation a bit, right? Like, and back into relationship with culture, right? Because it doesn't have to be, the songs don't have to be good, although many of them end up being good, right? And we're in this, supportive process of like filtering out, okay, what are the keepers and what are like, okay, that's great personal expression and we're glad to sing that. But what's going to stick, right? And it's this creative process that is, again, one of those things that we need to like feel in our bones, right? And have in order to have a sustainable culture that isn't looking for, what's the next bell and whistle that's going to activate my dopamine. Right.
Good way to put it.
Right. Because that's the technological world that we're living in, is it's like we have all of these massive, beautiful distractions that are trying to get us out of our embodied experience. Right. We have, and this also like shopping mentality rather than this is what is right here, right now mentality.
What would you say to someone that is interested in the idea of song circles and attending one or being part of a song circle gathering, but they're not quite fully opened with their voice yet, and they have some intimidation or fear about singing with others, what would you say? Like,
I mean, Pete Seeger used to say, if you can talk, you can sing, right? And that's about that. There should be no level of judgment in community singing, right? Like it's not a performance. Though there are people who perform and guide the group, right? And guiding the group is an art and a skill, I would say. But as a participant, like one, our voices merge together, right? And two, when our voices do merge together, we're actually training you to sing, right? The wavelengths of notes, when we're singing a harmony, actually, there's like the first note, like the root note, and then the fifth, right? These actually have a 2 to 3 relationship on the wavelengths, right? So when we're in touch with our body, when we're singing, we feel in the resonant chamber of our lungs whether we're in tune with the group or not. And so when you're singing with other people, singing is sort of self-attuning, right? Because your body is training itself to listen for what the note that you want is. And if you're off, your body is actually going to feel better when you're in resonance. And so you're seeking the resonance.
There you go.
Which is not the experience that we get by teaching people to sing solo.
Big difference.
Big difference.
That right there, the way you put that, seems like it could make a lot more people open up to the idea of being in a song circle, because it's self-correcting. You just show up, you just start finding that note, and then you adjust based on what you're hearing around you and what you're feeling with the waves, and
right.
It's a lot easier than people might think.
It's a lot easier, right? And it's first, it's egoless. It doesn't matter. And second, when it doesn't matter and you're in a group, you'll get better. Like that's pretty scientific, actually.
Do you feel like people can get benefits even if they're not ready to sing and they're just there and they're just taking it in? Do you think there's benefits to that as well? Just being there?
I think so, right? I think, you're witnessing a different culture in a way, right? Because it's organized not around the individual principle. Anybody can contribute a song in an open circle, right? Anybody can write their own music, right? So you're already changing by introducing yourself to that idea, right? Rather than buying tickets to a concert where you sit and drink a beer and listen to music that is, maybe they have a good solo that wasn't on the album. But, and don't get me wrong, I love the experience of live music, right? I've done a lot of that. And I really think that it's decentralizing music, whether in the audience and performer dynamic or in the communal dynamic, gives us such a richer experience.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about decentralizing it in the audience performer dynamic, and how does that look to you when that's happening?
I mean, it's like, well, I like to envision, right, like if I'm leading a song circle, the audience is sort of participating as an instrument, right? And so I can call forth, I can give certain instructions like, let's sing that sweeter. Let's sing that out to everyone on the planet. Let's alternate low and high voices. Let's use our moon voice. Let's be really inside of ourselves when we sing that. And those have different feelings, and they evoke different feelings in the voices. In leading dance, it's sort of the same same dynamic also, right? It's like people are fully embodied, right? Like it's, there's movement and music together and we're all participating in it. And we get that sort of attunement as a group, right? That we never would have gotten doing something more passive.
That makes sense. Do you think that there's also a way that venues can set things up for a better dynamic between the audience and the performer that's more cohesive and merged?
Oh, you mean in more of a
traditional
or
where it's a performance? Do you think there's ways to kind of evolve that and shift that so that it's a more rich experience for everyone?
I mean, a lot of that, I guess in terms of larger performances, right? There's probably, when performers break the fourth wall, that's when I think you bridge these two forms, right? And that's not always possible, right? Larger shows, there's security reasons. There's no way Steven Tyler is going to walk out on a catwalk, right? These days, it's very vulnerable. But I would say, yeah, like with the smaller shows, right? Like I used to go to punk shows in high school, right? And the performer comes out and crowd surfs, right? And it's all very communal, and like that makes for an amazing experience that you feel like you're a part of. Or I would say some of the more the people who understand that as a musician they're a shaman and they're guiding the audience through an experience, right? They're not just there to play songs, right? And I'm going to offend some people if I name the bands that I've seen just play songs, right? But like my experience, like I remember seeing Perry Farrell of Jane's Addiction, right, at Shoreline Amphitheater down in the Bay, right? And he got it, right? He totally was like, okay, I've got 50,000 people and we're guiding them through an experience, right? Like talking to the audience, but being real, not just like it's a line, right? It's actually like you're a real person and you're channeling something that is relevant. That I think is that's I think what makes the great musicians, stand apart from, just people who are writing songs, right? Is they really they know how to get the audience into that space where the audience is truly present with the music and themselves.
Are there any upcoming festivals or live music experiences you're looking forward to?
I mean, this summer I will probably go to Singing Alive.
It's always a good one.
Yeah. I don't have any others on the docket right now.
Maybe see where the wind blows.
Yeah, see where the wind. Well, there's a group of folks that want to do song circles at the Rainbow Gathering, actually.
Oh.
Which is supposed to be. I haven't been to a Rainbow Gathering in like 8 years.
I've never been to one.
Oh my gosh. It's supposed to be in Northern California.
That's what I've heard.
Washington.
Yeah.
Is what's likely. And so we want to do, a friend of mine wants to do Song Village. Right. And so I'm like, okay, that would be interesting. That would drag me back to a Rainbow Gathering. So
we'll have to do another podcast if you end up doing the Song Village at the Rainbow Gathering.
Yeah.
Some interesting stories.
Yeah. Yeah. That would be an interesting place to podcast from too. Like,
it would
do some interviews.
Be in the vibe there. Yeah. And
just because that's such a long running trip, right? That's been going for 50.
Just
1972 was the first one, right? So
right around when Country Fair started in 69. Yeah. So another long running establishment. Mm-hmm. Have you spent much time at Country Fair? Do you go often?
I went 2 years ago.
Okay.
Me and my partner at the time, Miracle worked actually. It was brilliant.
Nice.
We were following one ticket on Craigslist, and we get to the gate. We're like, how are we going to get another ticket, right? And we hadn't met the Craigslist person yet. And these kids from, I'm assuming they were from U of O. We were like 30 feet away, and they were like, we've got 2 free tickets. And we're like, hey.
Amazing timing.
So that was my first Country Fair.
What was your experience going in?
I loved it. It was, I mean, there's definitely brilliant art and performances. I would say it felt very crowded.
That can be the experience of
Yeah.
dropping in during the daytime. It's very crowded. Did you camp outside of the fair?
We just did a
or
one day.
One day.
Yeah.
My first experience was that same kind of thing, dropping in for one day, and it was felt very crowded and overwhelming.
Yeah.
But I think the way to do it, either is, being part of the fair, camping at night in the fair.
Yeah.
That's one way. And then if you can't do that, camping on one of the neighboring properties that opens up for campgrounds.
Right.
And then you're just walking into the fair each day, and you can be more grounded in the overall vibe.
Yeah.
And it's not so overwhelming.
Yeah.
You're kind of coming and going that way. But yeah, just dropping in for one day is kind of overwhelming.
We had a really beautiful moment. There was a piano in the forest.
Oh, I know that.
And
yeah, that one.
someone who was just playing on the piano, and
Yeah.
we just like laid down in this little plush space, and we're like, it was like late in the afternoon when it was hot, and we're like,
Beautiful moment. Nice.
Yeah.
Did you go in the Ritz?
The Ritz?
The Ritz, that's the big sauna and showers.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that's a whole experience.
Okay.
Some people will spend all day there. And they have live music in the sauna. It's a whole thing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a whole experience. It's really beautiful woodwork and lots of art and everything. Just very amazing sauna and shower.
Right.
Yeah, Country Fair has so many aspects to it. So many. It's really like nothing on earth.
Right.
The fact that it exists. It can be compared to Burning Man a little bit, people do that, but it's really its own thing.
It's its own thing. It reminds me most of, I used to go to Renaissance festivals as a kid.
And that's how it started.
Right, with my parents. And that, it feels like,
it's got that original thread of Renaissance fair.
Right. It's the medieval market in a way, right?
And what's cool about it is that the fair as an organization owns the land, so that allows things to continue on and build upon themselves, whereas most festivals, they're having to lease the land, and
right.
Things cannot be set up permanently, structures or anything.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting aspect of the fair that allows you to feel more grounded, and you can feel the continuity over the years.
Right.
It's really beautiful. And
yeah.
How things are added to it in this kind of collage way, and lots of creativity. The signs, if you ever read the signs, they're really funny.
Right. Yeah.
There's so much humor.
It's very humorous, like jovial village feel,
whimsical,
right? Which is what we're trying to approximate with festivals, really, right? Is that feeling of dense urban market environment that is so rare in North America because of the way we've developed, right? Whereas, like it feels like when I was in Europe 2 years ago, right? Like, the town square is just like that. It's crowded, and it's sort of a circus, right? That's sort of the way that we used to live.
Yeah, and it can be fun and whimsical and colorful and amazing.
Right. Because of course you would add whimsy to it. Otherwise it would just be the market, and that's boring.
Yeah.
Right.
Boring. And parades are great. There's always parades going through the fair.
Yeah.
Random times. Parade comes through. Yeah, there's the one thing about fair that can be tricky is the FOMO. The FOMO can come up strong if you're looking through the program and you're realizing you want to be in all these opposite ends of the fair at the same time. So I'd stay away from looking at the schedule too much. Just enjoy where you are and surrender to that.
That was my perspective the last couple of years I went to Burning Man, was, what is this schedule thing you're handing me?
This is not computing.
This is not actually relevant to my experience. Like, this is me sitting at camp reading a 100-page book to see what should I be doing right now. Right. And it's like, no,
you're already doing what you should be doing right now.
No, I'm at a festival. What am I going to go find? Like, I don't know.
You just start wandering.
Just start wandering.
Yeah, totally. I wanted to ask a little bit about your work with song circles and leading those, because I know that's something that you do. And at Singing Alive, I really enjoyed what you were doing kind of just casually off to the side with some of the song circles that were starting up in the field there. And Has there been any more development with that lately, or anything you're excited about this year coming up?
I mean, I'm hoping to lead a circle this year. That would be nice. I'm experimenting with doing song and dance in the park this summer in Portland. So we have a group that we're going to do, song and dance together, starting in a couple weeks, and see how that goes. I've been involved with a really wonderful kirtan community, which meets weekly. It's sort of house party style in the winter, and
that's great,
in the park in the summer. But yeah, I mean, I helped with this Singing Alive offshoot in Sedona last fall, which was super fun.
Let's go into that a little bit.
Yeah.
What was that experience like for you?
Well, it was interesting because suddenly I'm the organizer of a small festival. Camp out. Right.
It's funny how those things happen sometimes.
Yeah. And so it was really enjoyable, right? It was a travel that was mixed in with this permaculture install that I was doing in Santa Fe, which I'm actually headed to the second round of that next week.
Oh, cool.
So it was magic timing that came together. But when I led at Cantando, Colleen, the person who organized the Sedona gathering, was like, I want you to be there and help me organize. I'm like, okay. Which she didn't know, but I go back in song circles. I think the first circle song I sang was 25 years ago, right? With the Unitarians, right? Which is how I got gated into the Sufi dance traditions also, right? And so, there's songs that I've known and that I've sung for 20, 25 years. And with the Unitarians, we had this youth empowerment, intentional community model for weekend conferences, right? And so we would just it was sort of like a Buddhist, Quaker, pagan midnight meeting where we would just sit in a circle and eye gaze and sing songs.
Sounds great.
Right. Yeah. And now I look back at it and I'm like, who taught the teenagers Tantra? That's wild. But yeah, it feels really natural for me to be in Song Village settings due to those experiences. Right. And I feel like I carry a lot of songs. I have a book of or I have a spreadsheet trying to keep track of everything, and I'm trying to keep track of where songs are from, right? Because I don't want to be irresponsible with cultural information, right? So but the Song Villages, I really love the heart-centeredness of it, and it was really beautiful in Sedona, watching it come together, right? Sort of against all odds, because we're making a new thing and we have no idea how it's going to go. We can only set intentions, right? And the community has to respond to the intention, and they did. And we had a wonderful little gathering.
So much trust involved in that process.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, a lot of trust, a little bit of risk, right?
So it all went really well, though.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. We had 5 song leaders, right? So we did sort of 5 sessions, Friday night through Sunday morning. We built a beautiful fire pit altar. It's in this beautiful canyon in Sedona called Oak Creek.
Okay.
So
is it planned to happen next year?
It is. Yeah. That's great. I believe she's doing spring equinox is the target date.
Okay. How would people find out information about it?
It's called Singing the Soul Alive.
Okay.
So I think singingthesoulalive.com.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Then I wanted to ask about if people want to find out more about what you're doing, do you have anywhere to direct people?
I currently have, I currently have a website, michaeltank.org, which is sort of a portfolio. I wouldn't say it's a very good, it's more set up like a grad student art portfolio. So it's these are some projects I did. But yeah, that would be a place to connect.
Great. Nice. So at the end of every podcast, I borrowed this from No with the Synchronicity podcast. There's 3 simple questions I like to ask. First one is, what's your favorite color?
Clear sky blue.
Ooh, nice. It's also mine. What's your favorite number?
Ooh. 11.
Okay. And what's your favorite animal?
Giraffe.
Ooh, nice one. I like giraffes. Michael, thank you so much for taking the time to come be on the podcast.
Absolutely. Thank
here
you.
at the cottage. It's been a real pleasure, and I'm sure we could do many more of these. There's a lot of other things I'd love to talk with you about.
Cool.
So I'd love to have you on again.
Sounds great.
So thanks again for being here.